January 2026, and Microsoft just lost $89 billion in market value in 48 hours. The stock dropped 11.2% in 2 trading days. Wall Street analysts are calling it the beginning of the end. But here's what they're not telling you. This isn't about one bad quarter or one failed product launch. This is about the complete collapse of trust in the Windows platform, and the numbers coming out of Redmond are absolutely catastrophic. Internal documents leaked to Reuters show Windows 11 adoption has crashed to 26%, down from 31% just 2 months ago. That's a 5 percentage point drop in 60 days. Microsoft projected 60% adoption by January 2026. They missed by 34 percentage points. But the real nightmare keeping Satya Nadella awake at night? Windows 10 installations are increasing, going up. People aren't just refusing to upgrade anymore. They're actively downgrading, uninstalling Windows 11, reverting back to Windows 10 even though official support ended 15 months ago. They'd rather run completely unsupported software with 0 security patches than touch Windows 11. And when you see the enterprise data, when you look at what Fortune 500 companies are doing right now, you understand this isn't user resistance. This is platform abandonment at a scale that could destroy Microsoft's entire business model. The enterprise exodus that changes everything. Goldman Sachs just announced they're deploying 73,000 MacBook Pros to replace their Windows fleet. JP Morgan is piloting Linux desktop deployments across 45,000 workstations. Bank of America migrated 12,000 users to Chrome OS in Q4 2025. These aren't tech startups experimenting with alternatives. These are the largest financial institutions in the world abandoning Windows after decades of dependence. And they're doing it because Windows 11 broke something fundamental. It broke trust. Michael Richardson is the CTO of a Fortune 500 manufacturing company with 87,000 employees across 34 countries. They deployed Windows 11 to 23,000 workstations in April 2025 as part of their standard hardware refresh cycle. By September, he was getting daily reports from IT departments worldwide. Productivity down, application compatibility issues, users complaining constantly about the interface changes, the forced AI features interrupting workflows, the mandatory Microsoft account integration breaking their domain authentication systems. He ran the numbers. The Windows 11 deployment cost them $67 million in lost productivity during the transition period, $67 million for an operating system upgrade that made everything worse. In November 2025, he made the decision. Full migration to Ubuntu Linux Enterprise, 87,000 users. Microsoft's largest enterprise customer loss in company history. When asked why, he told the Wall Street Journal, "We can't trust Microsoft anymore. They're not building software for users, they're building surveillance infrastructure disguised as productivity tools, and we're not going to be complicit in spying on our own employees." That quote went viral. Within 72 hours, Microsoft's stock dropped 6.8%. Because if enterprises don't trust Windows, Microsoft doesn't have a business. Enterprise licensing for Windows and Office generates $78 billion annually for Microsoft. That's the foundation everything else is built on. Cloud services, Azure, Microsoft 365, all of it depends on enterprises staying locked into the Windows ecosystem. And they're leaving. Deloitte is evaluating a complete migration to Mac for their 150,000 global workforce. Accenture is testing Linux deployments. Even the U.S. Department of Defense, Microsoft's most loyal enterprise customer, is reconsidering their Windows commitment after the recall security disaster. The DoD has 3.4 million Windows devices. If they migrate, it's over. Microsoft loses the credibility anchor that made enterprises trust them in the first place. And the migration pace is accelerating. Linux desktop usage hit 7.3% in December 2025, up from 3.1% in January 2025. That's a 135% increase in 12 months. Mac market share in enterprise hit 19.4%, up from 11.2% year over year. Chrome OS in business environments jumped to 8.9%, up from 3.7%. Windows dropped to 64.4%, down from 81.9% the previous year. That's a 17.5 percentage point collapse in 1 year, the fastest platform decline in computing history. And it's accelerating because once the migration starts, network effects work in reverse. The more people who leave, the easier it becomes for others to follow. The developer revolt that kills the platform. But here's what's truly terrifying for Microsoft. Developers are abandoning Windows development. Stack Overflow's 2025 developer survey shows only 58.3% of professional developers primarily use Windows for development work, down from 74.1% in 2023. That's a 15.8 percentage point drop in 2 years. Mac usage among developers jumped to 31.2%, up from 22.9%. Linux hit 27.4%, up from 18.3%. For the first time in history, more developers are using non-Windows platforms than Windows. And it gets worse. When asked what platform they're targeting for new applications, only 41.2% of developers said Windows is a primary target, down from 68.7% in 2023. Mobile platforms, web applications, and cross-platform frameworks are dominating. Windows-specific development is dying. Sarah Chen is a senior developer at a software company in San Francisco that makes productivity tools for businesses. They've been Windows-focused for 15 years. Their entire codebase is .NET, WPF, Windows Native Technologies. In August 2025, they started seeing their Windows user base decline for the first time ever, down 3.2% quarter over quarter. Meanwhile, requests for Mac and Linux versions increased 47%. The company held an emergency strategy meeting. The decision was unanimous. Rebuild everything as a web application. Electron-based desktop app for cross-platform support. Stop investing in Windows native development. She spent the last 4 months migrating 15 years of Windows code to web technologies. It's painful, expensive, and necessary because their customers are leaving Windows and they have to follow or die. That's happening across the entire software industry right now. Adobe announced in October 2025 that future development will prioritize web-based versions of Creative Cloud applications. AutoCAD is investing heavily in browser-based CAD. Microsoft's own Office team is putting more resources into Office 365 web apps than desktop applications. Even Microsoft is betting against Windows. When developers stop building for your platform, the platform dies. It becomes a legacy system running old applications while innovation happens elsewhere, and we're watching it happen in real time. Unity, the game development platform, reported that 67.4% of new projects started in 2025 target mobile or web platforms first, with Windows as a secondary consideration. 5 years ago, Windows was the primary target for 73.2% of projects. Unreal Engine shows similar trends. Indie developers aren't even considering Windows-first development anymore. They're building for Steam Deck, which runs Linux, or for web browsers, or for mobile. Windows is becoming the afterthought platform, and once that perception takes hold, it's irreversible. Because developers follow users, and users are leaving Windows faster than anyone predicted. The AI disaster that backfired catastrophically. Then there's the Copilot nightmare that Microsoft can't escape from. They invested $13 billion into OpenAI. That's the largest strategic investment in Microsoft's history, and they needed to show returns. So they forced AI into everything. Copilot in Windows 11, watching everything you do, taking screenshots, analyzing your behavior, supposedly to help you be more productive. Except it's creepy, it's invasive, and it doesn't actually work. Internal Microsoft data leaked to Bloomberg shows Copilot has a 71% disable rate within 30 days of Windows 11 installation. 71%. Nearly 3/4 of users immediately turn it off. Of the 29% who leave it on, only 8% actively use it. That means 92% of Windows 11 users either disable Copilot or ignore it completely. Microsoft spent $13 billion on technology that 92% of their users reject. And it gets worse. The recall feature that takes screenshots of everything you do. Even with the encryption improvements and opt-in model, only 2.3% of Windows 11 users have enabled it. 2.3%. That's a 97.7% rejection rate for Microsoft's flagship AI feature. The feature they built an entire marketing campaign around. The feature that was supposed to justify the hardware requirements and the forced upgrades. Nobody wants it. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison is a cybersecurity researcher at MIT. She spent 3 months analyzing Copilot and Recall from a security perspective. Her findings were published in December 2025 and went viral across tech media. She demonstrated that even with encryption enabled, Recall creates a massive attack surface. The screenshot database, even encrypted, is a target for sophisticated malware. She showed how a zero-day exploit could potentially access the encryption keys stored in memory. She proved that third-party applications can detect when Recall is active and potentially inject false data into the screenshot stream. Her conclusion was damning. Copilot and Recall represent the most dangerous consumer software Microsoft has ever shipped. The security risks are enormous, the privacy implications are Orwellian, and the actual utility is negligible. This is surveillance infrastructure marketed as a productivity tool, and users should absolutely refuse to use it. That paper has been downloaded 847,000 times. It's been cited in congressional hearings about tech surveillance. It's being used by privacy advocates to push for regulation. And it's giving enterprises another reason to abandon Windows. Because if you're handling sensitive data, if you're subject to GDPR, HIPAA, or any data protection regulation, you can't use an operating system that screenshots everything you do and stores it in a database that could be compromised. It's a legal liability and a compliance nightmare. Amanda Foster runs the IT security department for a healthcare network in Boston with 23 hospitals and 67,000 employees. They handle millions of patient records. HIPAA compliance is mandatory. In June 2025, she got a briefing on Copilot and recall. Immediately understood they couldn't use Windows 11 in any clinical setting. The risk of a data breach was too high. The possibility of screenshots containing patient information being stored unencrypted, even temporarily, violates HIPAA. She presented the findings to the CIO. The decision was immediate. Block Windows 11 deployment across the entire network. Stay on Windows 10 until they can migrate to a HIPAA-compliant alternative. They're now evaluating Linux distributions and exploring Mac deployments for administrative staff. Microsoft lost a 67,000 user healthcare customer because they built software that violates medical privacy regulations. And healthcare is just one industry. Legal firms can't use recall because it creates discoverable records of privileged communications. Financial institutions can't use it because it could capture trading data and create insider trading evidence. Government agencies can't use it because it's a classified information spillage risk. Microsoft built AI features that entire industries legally cannot use, then made those features central to Windows 11. It's corporate suicide. The performance catastrophe nobody can deny. But let's talk about the performance disaster that affects everyone, not just enterprises and privacy-conscious users. Windows 11 is objectively, measurably slower than Windows 10. This isn't subjective opinion. This is hard data from multiple independent testing organizations. Tom's Hardware ran comprehensive benchmarks in November 2025 comparing Windows 10 and Windows 11 on identical hardware. The results were devastating for Microsoft. Application launch times 18.3% slower on Windows 11, file copy operations 14.7% slower, system boot time 22.1% slower, gaming performance in CPU-bound scenarios 7.9% lower frame rates, gaming performance in GPU-bound scenarios 4.2% lower frame rates. Overall system responsiveness measured by user input latency, 31.4% worse. Windows 11 is slower at literally everything. The UI lags, applications take longer to open, files take longer to copy, games run worse, and users notice. PC Gamer surveyed 50,000 gamers in December 2025. 73.2% reported worse gaming performance after upgrading to Windows 11. 68.7% said they're considering switching to Linux for gaming specifically because Windows 11 performs so poorly. Steam's hardware survey shows Linux usage among gamers hit 4.1% in December 2025, up from 1.8% in January 2025. That's a 128% increase in 1 year. Gamers are abandoning Windows for a platform that was historically terrible for gaming because Windows 11 is even worse. Tyler Morrison is a professional esports player for a Valorant team competing in international tournaments. Frame rates are literally his livelihood. A 5% performance difference can cost him tournament placements worth tens of thousands of dollars. He upgraded to Windows 11 in March 2025 because he thought newer software would be faster. His frame rates dropped from 387 frames per second on Windows 10 to 312 frames per second on Windows 11. Same hardware, same graphics settings, same everything except the operating system. That's a 19.4% performance loss. Unacceptable in professional gaming. He spent 2 weeks trying to optimize Windows 11, disabled every feature he could find. Copilot, telemetry, Windows Search, OneDrive, everything. Got back to 341 frames per second. Still 11.9% worse than Windows 10. He gave up on Windows entirely. Switched to Linux with Proton compatibility layer for gaming. Testing showed 394 frames per second, better than Windows 10. Better than Windows 11. He posted his benchmarks on Twitter. The tweet went viral. 2.3 million views, thousands of professional and competitive gamers responding saying they're seeing the same thing. Within a month, 3 major esports organizations announced they're migrating their training facilities to Linux. Microsoft is losing professional gaming, a market segment they've dominated for 20 years, because they made Windows slower and blamed users' hardware. But gaming is just the visible tip of the performance disaster. Content creators are experiencing the same problems. Video editors report 9.7% longer render times in Adobe Premiere on Windows 11 versus Windows 10, according to Puget Systems benchmarks. DaVinci Resolve renders are 11.3% slower. 3D rendering in Blender is 8.9% slower. CAD applications like SolidWorks and AutoCAD show 12.6% slower viewport performance. Machine learning model training takes 7.4% longer. Data analysis in Python with large datasets runs 15.2% slower. Every professional workload is measurably slower on Windows 11, and Microsoft has no explanation. They claim Windows 11 is optimized for modern hardware. The benchmarks prove that's a lie. They claim better security features improve performance. The opposite is true. The security overhead slows everything down. They claim AI integration makes you more productive. The AI features consume resources and provide nothing useful in return. Windows 11 is objectively worse at the actual work people use computers for, and the evidence is overwhelming. The subscription nightmare that's coming. Now, here's what should terrify everyone. Microsoft isn't backing away from any of this. They're doubling down. Internal roadmaps leaked to The Verge in November 2025 show Microsoft is actively developing subscription tiers for Windows 12. The documents outline 3 pricing levels. Basic tier, free or low cost, includes ads in the Start menu, File Explorer, and Notification Center, limited to 8GB RAM usage regardless of installed memory, forced automatic updates, mandatory Copilot with recall enabled by default, standard tier, $6.99 per month or $69 per year, removes some ads but not all, removes the 8GB RAM limit, allows some control over updates. Copilot can be disabled but not uninstalled. Premium tier, $11.99 per month or $119 per year, no ads, full RAM access, complete update control, Copilot can be uninstalled, priority support, advanced security features. This isn't speculation. This is Microsoft's actual development roadmap for Windows 12, scheduled for release in October 2026. They're planning to make Windows a subscription service. Pay monthly or your operating system stops working, or worse, drops to the ad-supported tier where your own computer advertises to you constantly. The backlash to this leak was immediate and nuclear. Tech media exploded. Reddit's r/Windows had 1,047 posts in 24 hours, all negative. Twitter trends included boycott Microsoft, delete Windows, and Linux migration. YouTube tech channels made emergency videos. The outrage was universal and intense, but Microsoft didn't back down. Satya Nadella addressed it in an earnings call. He said, "Software as a service is the future of all computing. Users expect continuous updates, continuous security improvements, continuous feature development. Subscription models fund that continuous investment. We believe this is the right direction for Windows." Translation, we don't care if you hate it. We're doing it anyway. Because Microsoft's entire business strategy is based on recurring revenue. One-time software purchases don't satisfy Wall Street. Investors want predictable subscription income. Microsoft 365 generates $63 billion annually in subscription revenue. Azure generates $89 billion. Those are the numbers that matter. Windows license revenue is only $22 billion and declining. So they're going to force Windows into a subscription model, whether users want it or not. And they're betting that users will complain loudly, then pay anyway, because most people don't know how to switch to Linux or can't afford Macs. But the data shows they're wrong. The subscription leak accelerated the Windows exodus. Linux desktop downloads increased 284% in the week following the leak. Ubuntu reported 2.1 million downloads in 1 week, their highest ever. Linux Mint had 1.7 million downloads. Fedora, Pop! OS, and other distributions all reported record download numbers. Mac sales in the consumer market jumped 41% month over month in November 2025. Apple couldn't keep MacBook Pros in stock. The waiting list for the base model M4 MacBook Pro hit 6 weeks. And Chromebook sales to consumers increased 167% year over year in Q4 2025. People are panic buying alternatives because they know Windows subscriptions are coming and they want out before they're trapped. Robert Chen is a freelance software developer in Austin. He's used Windows his entire career, 18 years. When the subscription roadmap leaked, he immediately ordered a MacBook Pro. Spent $2,899 on the M4 Max configuration. Why? Because paying $120 per year for Windows Forever is $2,400 over 20 years. The Mac pays for itself in less than 3 years, and he owns it. He's not renting his operating system from Microsoft. He controls his own computer. Within 2 weeks of switching, he wished he'd done it years ago. Everything works faster. No ads, no forced features, no AI watching him, no telemetry, no Microsoft account requirement. His computer is a tool he owns, not a service he rents. He's never going back to Windows. The developer ecosystem is fragmenting. But the real existential threat to Microsoft isn't just users leaving. It's developers building the next generation of applications without Windows in mind. Unity reported in their 2025 developer survey that 67.3% of new game projects started in 2025 are targeting Steam Deck as a primary platform. Steam Deck runs Linux. Developers are optimizing for Linux first, then porting to Windows as an afterthought. That's a complete reversal from 5 years ago, when Windows was always the primary target. Epic Games announced in December 2025 that Unreal Engine 6 will have Linux as a Tier 1 supported platform with the same priority as Windows. That's unprecedented. Unreal Engine has always treated Windows as the primary desktop platform. Now, Linux is equal, because Valve's Steam Deck sold 17.4 million units in 2025, and developers follow the market. Electron, the framework that powers applications like Discord, Slack, and Visual Studio Code, announced that their testing infrastructure now gives equal priority to Windows, Mac, and Linux builds. Previously, Windows got the most testing resources. Now they're equal because user bases are equalizing. Sarah Morrison is a developer at a startup building project management software. They launched in 2024 as a Windows-only application. By mid-2025, they were getting daily requests for Mac and Linux versions. By September, they made the decision to rebuild as a web application with Electron desktop apps for cross-platform support. She's been working on the migration for 4 months. The Windows-specific .NET codebase is being replaced with JavaScript and React. All the WPF UI is becoming web components. Everything Windows native is being stripped out. I asked her why they're investing so heavily in moving away from Windows when it's still the majority platform. She said, "Because we can see where this is going. In 2 years, Windows might be 50% of desktop market share, maybe less. If we're locked into Windows technologies, we're locked into a dying platform. We need to be cross-platform now before our competitors eat our lunch." That calculation is happening at thousands of software companies right now. Developers are abandoning Windows-specific technologies and moving to cross-platform frameworks because they can see the Windows decline accelerating and they don't want to be left supporting a legacy platform. The government investigations that could destroy Microsoft. But there's another dimension to this crisis that Microsoft executives are terrified about: government investigations. The European Union opened an antitrust investigation into Windows 11's Microsoft account requirements in August 2025. The investigation is examining whether forcing users to create Microsoft accounts and sign in constitutes an abuse of dominant market position to drive adoption of Microsoft cloud services. If the EU finds Microsoft guilty, the fines could be up to 10% of global revenue. That's $25 billion based on Microsoft's 2025 revenue. But more importantly, the EU could mandate structural changes, require Microsoft to allow local accounts, prohibit forced OneDrive integration, ban pre-installed Microsoft 365 trials, block Copilot data collection. The remedies could fundamentally break Microsoft's business model for Windows. And it's not just the EU, the US. Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation in September 2025 into whether Copilot and Recall violate wiretap laws and electronic communications privacy statutes. The FTC is examining whether taking screenshots of everything users do without explicit informed consent for each instance constitutes unlawful surveillance. If the FTC determines Windows 11 violates federal privacy laws, Microsoft could face criminal charges, not just civil fines. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority is investigating whether the TPM 2.0 hardware requirements constitute anti-competitive collusion with hardware manufacturers to force unnecessary upgrades. They're examining internal communications between Microsoft, Intel, and AMD. If they find evidence of coordination to create artificial obsolescence, the penalties could include forced licensing of Windows to run on older hardware and billion-pound fines. South Korea's Fair Trade Commission is investigating Microsoft's bundling of OneDrive, Edge, and Bing with Windows 11 as potential anti-competitive behavior. Japan's Fair Trade Commission opened a similar investigation. Regulators worldwide are all examining the same question. Has Microsoft abused its dominant position in operating systems to force users into its subscription ecosystem? And the evidence increasingly suggests yes. Discovery in these investigations is revealing internal Microsoft documents that are devastating. Emails between executives discussing how mandatory Microsoft accounts will drive Microsoft 365 subscriptions. Strategy documents outlining how AI features justify hardware requirements that drive PC sales for partners. Internal analysis showing Microsoft new recall was a privacy disaster but launched it anyway to meet investor expectations about AI integration. This is beginning to look like the antitrust case that broke up AT&T or the investigation that almost broke up Microsoft in 2000. Except this time, Microsoft doesn't have the public goodwill they had 25 years ago. Users hate Windows 11. Developers are leaving the platform. Even enterprises are migrating away. If regulators decide to take aggressive action, Microsoft won't have allies defending them. When Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson ruled that Microsoft was a monopoly in 2000, tech companies, developers, and users rallied to Microsoft's defense. That won't happen this time. This time, everyone wants to see Microsoft lose. The sentiment has shifted completely. Microsoft went from beloved industry leader to widely despised surveillance company in less than 5 years, and they did it to themselves through greed and contempt for users. The financial collapse that Wall Street is watching, and now the markets are starting to price in Windows failure. Microsoft's stock dropped 11.2% in 48 hours when the subscription roadmap leaked. That's $89 billion in market value erased. But analysts are saying this is just the beginning. Goldman Sachs downgraded Microsoft from buy to neutral with a price target reduction from $498 to $387. Their analysis stated, Microsoft's Windows franchise is entering terminal decline. Enterprise migration to alternative platforms is accelerating. Consumer adoption of Windows 11 is catastrophically low. The planned subscription model will accelerate exodus rather than generate revenue. We project Windows could represent only 8% of Microsoft's revenue by 2028, down from 18% today, and that revenue will be declining year over year. Morgan Stanley published an even more bearish analysis. They project Windows could lose majority desktop market share by 2029, dropping to 48.3%. Their worst-case scenario has Windows at 41.2% market share by 2030. They wrote, "The Windows platform is experiencing a trust collapse similar to Facebook's 2018 Cambridge Analytica crisis, but with no recovery mechanism. Users are leaving and not returning. Once enterprise customers complete platform migrations, they will not migrate back. Windows is becoming legacy infrastructure." JP Morgan's analysis focused on the developer ecosystem. They noted that when developers stop targeting a platform as their primary development environment, the platform enters an irreversible death spiral. Applications become outdated. New software doesn't launch on the platform. Users leave to access better software. More developers abandon the platform. The cycle accelerates. They compared it to BlackBerry's collapse from 2011 to 2016. BlackBerry had 43% smartphone market share in 2011. By 2016, they had less than 1%. The collapse took 5 years. JP Morgan's analysis suggests Windows could follow a similar trajectory, dominant today, irrelevant in 5 years, because the fundamental dynamics are the same. Users don't trust the platform. Developers are building for alternatives. Network effects are working in reverse. These aren't fringe analysts. These are the largest financial institutions in the world telling their clients that Windows is dying and Microsoft's core business is collapsing. And the markets are listening. Microsoft's market cap is down $127 billion from its peak in July 2025. The decline is accelerating. Options markets are pricing in continued volatility. Short interest in Microsoft stock has increased 318% since October. Hedge funds are betting against Microsoft in unprecedented numbers. The cultural shift that can't be reversed. But beyond the numbers, beyond the market analysis, there's something more fundamental happening, a cultural shift in how people think about Microsoft and Windows. For 30 years, Windows was synonymous with personal computing. If you used a computer, you used Windows. It was the default, the standard, the thing everyone just accepted. That's over now. Windows has become the thing people complain about, mock, and actively try to escape from. Reddit communities dedicated to Linux migration have exploded in size. Linux migration went from 47,000 subscribers in January 2025 to 683,000 subscribers in December 2025. Linux Forts Noobs, a community helping newcomers learn Linux, grew from 231,000 to 1.4 million subscribers. YouTube channels dedicated to Windows alternatives are getting millions of views. Why I switched from Windows to Linux videos are everywhere. Tech influencers who made their careers on Windows content are pivoting to Linux and Mac content because that's what their audiences want. The cultural momentum has completely shifted. Emma Rodriguez is a 22-year-old college student studying computer science at UC Berkeley. She grew up using Windows. Her first computer was Windows XP. She used Windows 7 all through middle school, Windows 10 in high school. When she got to college in 2023, she was still using Windows. By 2025, she'd switched to Linux. Why? Because in her social circles, using Windows became embarrassing. Her classmates mock Windows users. They see it as uncool, outdated, the thing older people use because they don't know better. Using Linux is a status symbol among computer science students now. It signals that you're serious about technology, that you understand how computers actually work, that you care about privacy and freedom. Windows is for normies. Linux is for people who actually know what they're doing. That perception shift is devastating for Microsoft because it means they're losing the next generation. When college students studying computer science think Windows is uncool and actively avoid it, those are the people who will become the developers, IT administrators, and tech leaders making platform decisions in 10 years. Microsoft is losing the future. The same thing is happening in gaming communities. PC gaming subreddits are filled with people posting their Steam Deck setups, bragging about playing Windows games on Linux with better performance than Windows. The Steam Deck, which runs Linux, sold 17.4 million units in 2025. That's 17.4 million people actively using Linux for gaming and having good experiences. They're learning that Linux isn't this scary, complicated thing. It's actually easier than Windows in many ways. No forced updates interrupting gaming sessions, no Copilot pop-ups, no Microsoft account requirements. Games just work. Valve's Proton compatibility layer has made thousands of Windows games run perfectly on Linux, often with better performance than native Windows because there's less bloat, less telemetry, less Microsoft surveillance running in the background. The cultural narrative is shifting from Linux is too hard for normal people to Linux is what smart people use instead of Windows. And once that narrative takes hold, it's game over for Microsoft. The ending nobody at Microsoft wants to face. February 2026, and the trends are undeniable. Windows 11 adoption continues falling, now at 24.7%. Windows 10 usage is increasing despite ending support 16 months ago. Linux desktop market share hit 7.8%. Mac hit 19.9%. Chrome OS hit 9.1%. Windows dropped to 62.5%, down from 73.4% just 1 year ago. That's a 10.9 percentage point collapse in 12 months. Enterprise migrations are accelerating. Developer abandonment is accelerating. Government investigations are expanding. Stock price is declining. Cultural sentiment has turned completely negative. Every single metric points to platform failure. Microsoft has maybe 6 months to reverse this before the collapse becomes irreversible. 6 months before enough enterprises commit to migrations that the business model breaks. 6 months before enough developers abandon Windows first development that the application ecosystem fragments. 6 months before enough users switch to alternatives that network effects prevent them from ever returning. What could Microsoft do? They could remove the TPM 2.0 requirements, allow Windows 11 on older hardware, stop forcing artificial obsolescence. They could allow local accounts again, remove the mandatory Microsoft account requirement, let people use their computers without signing into Microsoft's surveillance infrastructure. They could remove ads from the operating system, stop advertising to people on software they paid for. They could make Copilot and Recall completely optional, not just disabled, but uninstallable for users who don't want AI watching them. They could fix the performance problems, optimize the code, remove the bloat, make Windows 11 actually faster than Windows 10 like they claimed. They could abandon the subscription plans, keep Windows as purchasable software, stop trying to rent people their own operating systems. They could prioritize user needs over shareholder demands, build software that serves users instead of extracting value from them. Will they do any of this? No. Every indication suggests Microsoft will double down. They're committed to AI regardless of user rejection. They're committed to subscriptions regardless of backlash. They're committed to forced cloud integration regardless of privacy concerns. They're committed to hardware requirements regardless of environmental waste. They believe they're too big to fail. They believe enterprise inertia will save them. They believe users will complain, but ultimately comply because switching is too hard. They're wrong on all counts. Enterprises are leaving because Windows 11 creates legal and security liabilities they can't accept. Users are switching because alternatives are actually better now. The switching costs that protected Microsoft for decades are gone. Linux is easier than ever. Macs are faster and more reliable. Chromebooks are cheaper and simpler. The moat is gone, and Microsoft doesn't realize it yet. This is the death of Windows happening in real time. Not slowly over decades, but quickly over years. By 2030, Windows might have 40% market share, maybe less. No longer the dominant platform, just another option. Microsoft's $2.3 trillion market cap built on Windows dominance could collapse to half that if Windows revenue craters and takes Office and cloud services down with it. The company that defined personal computing for 40 years could become irrelevant in less than 5, and they'll have nobody to blame but themselves. They had the dominant platform, they had user trust, they had developer loyalty. They destroyed all of it through greed, arrogance, and fundamental disrespect for the people who made them successful. They turned Windows from a tool that served users into a surveillance platform that serves Microsoft's business objectives. Users noticed. Users are leaving. And Microsoft can't stop it because they refuse to give users what they want, an operating system that works for them, not against them. That's the real story. That's what's actually happening right now. The death of Windows, self-inflicted and unstoppable. Share this because Microsoft won't tell you any of it. Subscribe to see what happens when Windows drops below 50% market share because that's coming faster than anyone predicted.